Hello and welcome everyone to our latest presentation on an expiratory occlusion maneuver, a new monitoring technique in mechanical ventilation. Mechanical ventilation in combination with sedation tends to completely suppress a patient's respiratory drive and the effort. Though it is beneficial in the early stages, it is desirable to not have any spontaneous efforts, but in the later stages, it is better and it is desirable to maintain a spontaneous respiratory effort because it reduces atelectasis, improves oxygenation, reduces pulmonary vascular resistance, and may prevent diffuse diaphragm atrophy. Vigorous respiratory effort during an assisted ventilation, that is when the patient is breathing spontaneously, however, can induce what is called unintentional patient self-inflicted lung injury. This is something which I have seen more commonly with non-invasive ventilation, but it is very much possible in invasive ventilation also if the patient's respiratory efforts are vigorous. Large respiratory efforts increase the tidal volume and elevate both global and regional lung stress, increasing the risk of volutrauma in baby lung and exacerbating the already present respiratory failure. Now, these respiratory efforts, that is, the vigorous drives, can also cause a load induced diaphragm injury. So, even though we do want the patients to be breathing spontaneously, it has its side effects and we must prevent it, especially when it becomes more vigorous and starts harming the lung and the diaphragm. So, we need to find out the asynchrony. Respiratory drive and effort determine the risk of a patient developing patient ventilator asynchrony. Asynchrony usually results from a low respiratory drive, that is, there is some ineffective effort or reverse triggering, or high respiratory drive with excessive effort, that is, double triggering or flow starvation. These are the common asynchronies. Now, we must have some monitoring technique to identify that the patient is developing these problems so that we can solve them. Now, the available monitoring techniques are respiratory rate. The measurement of the respiratory rate is an unreliable indicator of the respiratory effort of the patient, as it is relatively unresponsive to changes to ventilatory loading and can be influenced by multiple factors. Now, other things that we see on a ventilator are the airway pressure and the flow, but they do not provide any direct information what is the inspiratory effort of the patient. They provide more information regarding what is the ventilator delivering. Airway pressure is an unreliable marker to quantify global lung stress in the presence of a respiratory effort, as it can underestimate the increased transpulmonary pressure generated by the negative pleural swings from the contraction of the inspiratory muscles, especially when the patient is breathing on a spontaneous mode. Now, basic inspection of the ventilatory waveforms is thus not very sensitive enough to rule out potential injuries of respiratory effort from the patient. Now, let's see what are the important pressures inside the lungs. The most important thing that we measure is the airway pressure. But this is a surrogate of what we actually want to measure, that is the alveolar pressure. The next important pressure that we need to know about is the pleural pressure. Now, what is more important to us is the transpulmonary pressure, that is the pressure difference across this space, that is between the alveolus and the pleural space. But since there is no way with which we can measure the alveolar pressure directly, we tend to surrogate it with the airway pressure. How it is important and why it actually matters. Since this is the pressure that is actually stressing the alveoli and causing the lung injury, we need to know about this pressure. Let's see how the pressure is differing based on the modes of ventilation and the pathologies of the patient. So in a normal breath, the alveolar pressure is 0, while the main drive for the air to enter inside the lungs is coming from the negative pressure that is being generated in the pleura. So there is inspiratory muscle contraction causing a negative pressure in these areas, which causes the air to enter into the lungs because of this positive pressure that is generated. Because the transpulmonary pressure is the alveolar pressure minus of the pleural pressure. So minus of -8 is +8. So there is a net movement of air into the lungs. Now let's see what's happened in the positive pressure. In a positive pressure ventilation, the pleural pressure is positive, but the main drive is coming from outside. The ventilator is pushing the air into the lungs, resulting in an alveolar pressure of 9. While the transpulmonary pressure, that is the pressure present inside the alveolus, is +8. Now let's see what happens if there is a stiff lung or there is some problem with the chest wall. Now here, even though the pressure generated is very high, this is the pressure that you are actually seeing on the ventilator, the airway pressure that you are monitoring, it is 30. But the actual pressure inside the alveolus is only 5. Why? Because most of the pressure is wasted in overcoming this stiffness in outside the lungs. Most probably a pleural effusion which is preventing the air from entering. So the most of the pressure is wasted to overcome the pressure from the fluid that is getting accumulated outside the lungs. So even though the monitoring shows a high airway pressure, the transpulmonary pressure isn't very high. So this patient is not having much of a ventilator induced lung injury. Now let's see what happens when the patient is in distress. This is most commonly seen in non-invasive ventilation, but can also be seen on invasively ventilated patients. And again, if you note the pressure, that is a pressure that is being measured in the airway, it is 10 here because the surrogate of the alveolar pressure. But since the patient is in distress, his inspiratory muscles are also working, which means that he or she is generating also a negative pressure in the alveolar space, which is around -15 over here. Now, the problem is, even though the clinician remains unaware because the peak airway pressure remains less, the actual transpulmonary pressure developed over here is quite high. So this is the problem when patient has a vigorous effort even when the patient is on ventilator. So you will tend to find higher tidal volumes with extremely less pressures. This is not because the patient has an extremely compliant lung. It is more likely because the patient is in distress and there is a huge negative pleural pressure which is being created, which can cause lung injury. Now, what are the other methods of monitoring available? There are some invasive methods like esophageal manometry. Now, it can monitor patient-ventilator interaction by evaluating the presence and intensity of the respiratory effort based on the esophageal pressure swings, which is used as a surrogate for pleural pressure. And this helps us in estimating the effect of the respiratory muscles, which will show us whether there is a vigorous effort or not. Now, however, as with all monitoring tools, this has problems like it requires time. More importantly, it requires a dedicated equipment which has cost, and it definitely requires some amount of expertise to appropriately interpret the signals. Busy clinicians prefer simple, feasible, and more importantly, a non-invasive technique to evaluate patient-ventilator interaction and respiratory effort. So for this purpose, a brief expiratory occlusion maneuver is being used to detect adverse patient-ventilator interaction. Let's see how it is done. So here, an end expiratory occlusion is applied at random for a duration of single inspiratory effort or up to 5 seconds. The spontaneous respiratory effort by the patient during this occlusion will give a negative pressure deflection in the airway pressure that we are monitoring. This unmasks the effort of the respiratory muscle because you have blocked the effect of the ventilator. Now, the magnitude of the negative pressure deflection during this occlusion is the P-OCC, and it is correlated with the muscle pressure that is generated during assisted ventilations. And since it is a single end expiratory occlusion applied intermittently at random, it does not alter the magnitude of the diaphragm's activation. Now this is how it is done. After a breath, there is an expiratory pause over here. So this, after some time, results in patient developing a effort. This is the effort being generated by the patient. Now this is the negative deflection that we are seeing, and this is the P occlusion. Now this P occlusion can be used to estimate both the muscle effort and the dynamic transpulmonary pressure, which can be used as a measure of dynamic mechanical stress that is being applied to the lung during inspiration. Both the P muscle and the P esophageal can be estimated from the P occlusion by validated correction factors that adjust for the chest wall's elastance and difference in chest wall kinetics. Now, the dynamic transpulmonary pressure is estimated by subtracting the esophageal pressure that we estimate from these values from the positive pressure that is being generated. And this may be a better reflection of peak regional lung stress than the quasi-static transpulmonary pressure we measure through esophageal monitoring. Although optimal values for these parameters have not been established, a P mus more than 15 and the transpulmonary pressure dynamic more than 20 indicates a respiratory effort and a dynamic lung stress. Now, what are the parameters which we can see over here? Excessive respiratory effort from the estimated values of P mus. So if the negative deflection is too high, then it can give us an estimate that the expiratory efforts are very high. And if there is no effort from the patient during this time, then it means that the patient is apneic. So if the patient has been expected and has been triggering the ventilator, it is most probably a auto trigger. Excessive lung stress during the spontaneous breathing can be estimated by the dynamic transpulmonary pressure values. Monitoring the patient's receiving neuromuscular blockade can be done by this method, because if there is an occlusion and there is no breath, it means that the effect of the neuromuscular blockade is still there. Expiratory occlusion also helps us in differentiating various asynchronies. Ineffective triggering, that is, if the patient's ventilatory effort is inadequate to trigger the ventilator, then it can be unmasked during this time. If you detect a patient's effort during this 5-second occlusion, it means that the patient is having ineffective triggering. End expiratory occlusion will also reveal the excessive and prolonged inspiratory effort or reverse triggering. If in that case the patient in reverse triggering, the patient will be generally apneic. In ventilator appears to trigger by the patient, but there is no respiratory effort during the occlusion, then it, as I already said, it means there is some kind of auto triggering going on. Here, as you see, the patient has been doing a double trigger. So you do a expiratory hold, and during the expiratory hold, you find no effort of the patient. During the 5-second expiratory hold, there is absolutely no effect. It means there is a reverse triggering. However, if you find a similar double triggering and then you do an expiratory hold, but here you find an extremely negative pressure being generated over here, it means that the patient's effort is excessive and the ventilator is unable to match the effort that the patient is giving. That is why there is a double trigger seen over here. So this can be an effective way in differentiating between double triggering and reverse triggering. Now, what are the limitations? P occlusion can be used to accurately detect excess P muscle and dynamic pleural pressure. This estimated values of these parameters are imprecise and cannot replace direct measurement. If you are doing a study, you cannot use this as a method. But however, it can be a surrogate for practical purposes at the bedside. The absence of respiratory effort during occlusion does not rule out the presence of respiratory effort from reverse triggering, as we have already seen. Reverse triggering cannot be detected by this method. It is the absence of the effort which is used as a surrogate for diagnosing reverse triggering. Dynamic hyperinflation and intrinsic peak may lead to underestimation of this effort, especially if the intrinsic peak is not equilibrated with the occluding airway. So what are the values? So to predict the P muscle, we use this formula. And to predict the P transpulmonary, we use this formula. This was the study which was done to correlate the values and get these estimates. So what is a take home? That is a very simple method. It can be done at the bedside by anyone, and it is non-invasive. You're not using any monitor, you're not adding any extra cost to the patient, and with just simple method you are able to detect a lot of asynchronies. However, we need more studies to confirm these correlation values so that the practice at the bedside can be improved and we are more sure of the values that we are getting. Thank you for your patience and check our website for further information.